Okay people, check this out. In this video, I'm going to be making things out of these parts of skateboards, which I like to call the hardware pieces. The hardware piece is this section of skateboard where the trucks are mounted. It's the worst part of skateboard since it doesn't produce that much material. There's also two different concaves, which usually doesn't fit nicely with others. And there's also the holes in the middle, which I personally don't like because it's usually dirty. Now, most people wouldn't even bother trying to recycle these, but I have a problem and I don't like throwing things away. And on top of that, I get so many of these pieces since each skateboard I break down gives me two of these. So instead of wasting these, I thought I could make something simple that anybody could enjoy. So the first thing I do is sanding off all the graphics, stickers, finishes, and glue residues and sanding it down to bare wood. Now, since I have to sand these boards all the time, I'm always looking for the fastest and the easiest way to do this, and this is probably the fastest and the easiest way I found so far. I'm using an angle grinder with a cheap 40 grit flap disc and pushing out all the gunk from the middle to the outside. It's very important to sand it down to bare wood, but it's also important not to remove too much material, so I'm moving the tool very fast and not staying in one spot. I also have this auto-adjusting toggle clamps to quickly switch sides. Some people suggested I get some type of foot clamp, but that's not really gonna make it any easier or faster. Using the toggle clamp actually gives me a little breathing time, so I'm not constantly sanding for 2 hours straight. Once I have them all sanded down to bare wood, I can get started on laminating. Since these parts have two different concaves to worry about and they usually don't fit nicely together, and the epoxy is really slippery, I roughly straighten out the parts and clamp it together so I can mark a straight line for me to reference later when it's in the press. To laminate them, I use epoxy instead of glue. The difference I notice with glue versus epoxy is that with glue, there's going to be a little bit of a spring back once I take it off the bottle jack. And sometimes I could see it bending back to its original shape while I'm resawing on the bandsaw, which can be very dangerous. But with epoxy, it doesn't give you that spring back and maintains its shape even after I resaw them or cut them into thin veneers. It also fills any voids or gaps, and there's a lot of them since I'm laminating 40 different hardware pieces at a time. So whenever I'm laminating skateboards together, I'm using TOTALBOAT's 2-to-1 high performance epoxy. And the epoxy is definitely more expensive than wood glue, but I would rather get a nice solid lamination and a peace of mind that it will be safe to cut or use. And if you're interested in any of TOTALBOAT's products, make sure to use the link down in the description below and get a nice little discount so it doesn't hurt the bank too much. I can then put it in my press and straighten out as best as I can with the line that I marked earlier. I clamped a strip of wood to keep all the parts flat against it, and then I slowly pump the bottle jack and make sure all the parts and the bottle jack won't slip. And then I could clean up any of the squeeze out and leave it in the press overnight. It's the next day and here's what I have. 40 of the hardware pieces laminated together. Now, before you get any ideas on what you can make with this block, let me explain a few things. The top and the bottom of this block is end grain. 5 out of 7 veneers of each skateboard would be end grain, which makes the colors of these veneers look very dull and it's really hard to sand them. The sides are what you want to show, but they're only about 4 inches tall and they're usually not straight, so you're very limited on what you could really make with this block. So whenever people ask me what tools they should buy if they want to recycle skateboards, and I usually tell them to get a lathe. It's cheap and you could probably get the tool and the lathe for less than 500 bucks, which is pretty affordable in woodworking. But the main reason why I recommend a lathe for recycling skateboards is the type of material you could produce usually will be fairly small. So when you laminate a bunch of nose and tails together or the hardware pieces together, you can just turn the whole block and make something nice and quick, and usually takes few hours and you'll have a finished product. So what you're seeing me do here is first cutting the block in half and then using the fresh cut face to the fence and resaw them about 2 inches wide. And then I can lay down the block and get a straight edge by cutting off the bottom and then referencing that to get a 2 inch by 2 inch strips. Now, it's not uncommon for these laminations to fail. Like I said, these are the worst parts of the skateboards, and remember, there's 2 different concaves in each part, and every skateboard has different curves, so you're bound to see some gaps and voids. So a quick and easy way to fix this is just by using some CA glue, and I'll show you how I reinforce these so it won't fail again. I cross-cut these strips to about 4 inches in length, and I think I ended up getting about 50 of these blocks that are about 4 inches by 2 inches by 2 inches. Now, the orientation of these blocks isn't the strongest, it's purely relying on glue for strength, and the way I'm going to use these blocks, I need a little bit more strength. So, how I'm going to reinforce these is I'm cross-cutting some 1/2 inch dowels to length so that I could insert them into the center of these blocks, and this should make it much stronger and have less chance of failure. I can then find the center of these blocks, which actually took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. And then I could use my drill press and start drilling out the middle of these blocks. Since my drill press doesn't go down as far as I needed it, I first drill out the hole as deep as I can, and then I use a spacer to prop up the block so I can finish drilling it out. I'm not drilling it all the way through, and I'm leaving about a 1/2 inch or less, which shouldn't be a problem. And once all the holes have been drilled out, I can start gluing in the dowels. I have walnut dowels and maple dowels, which really doesn't matter since they won't be shown, and they're equally strong. I'm just trying to use whatever I have laying around the shop. And by the way, that brass hammer that I'm using is the oldest tool that I have in this shop. I literally had it since day 1 of woodworking. And it's actually my dad's, but I took it, and I probably use this and the utility knife the most in the shop. And once the glue cures, I can cut off the extra with the jigsaw to make this job nice and quick. And then I can make it nice and flat using my belt sander. Now, anytime you want to make your product more premium, you gotta add brass. Adding brass to your woodworking project should always be a yes. And brass is soft enough so you can just use your woodworking tools to make it work for your needs. So I got these brass rings, which I'll have the link in the description, but the inside circle was a little too small for the hanger bolt that I'm using. So I'm just enlarging the holes using a step drill bit. And then I'm using a 4-minute epoxy from TOTALBOAT. It's not 5 minutes, it's a whole minute faster, which is a 4-minute epoxy. Just think about what you could do with the whole minute you just saved. Anyways, I can laminate the brass rings to the bottom of these blocks. And after the epoxy has cured, I drill out about a 3/8 inch hole about an inch down. And this is for the way it's going to be mounted on the lathe, as well as for the hanger bolt and the threaded inserts that I'll be using to hang it. And I just realized I haven't even mentioned what I was going to be making. So I'm making a coat hanger that you can mount on your wall. And originally I wanted to make it look like something that I made in the past since it was so popular and it got sold out even before I posted it. But that was before I had a daughter. And now that I have a daughter, I feel like I should make something a little bit more appropriate and less childish. And I guess this is all part of growing up. So I thought about different shapes for a while, and then I remembered something that I've been doing ever since she was born, which is play a quick 5-minute chess game in my downtime. And then I thought about all the pieces in the chess set and saw which would be a good shape for a coat hanger, and I really like the shape of the pond. If I made the head of the pond a lot bigger, it would show all the different layers of the skateboards, and I really like this collar of the pond, which would be a great way to stop any clothes hangers and separate it from the head, which can also hang something else like a hat or another clothes hanger. And all the hard work was up to making the block and adding the brass and the holes. Turning the blocks is really easy and fun and very enjoyable. And each block took about 20 to 30 minutes from start to finish, with oiling included. And this is the reason why I always recommend a lathe for a beginner. You can get an instant gratification and you can have a finished project ready to use in less than an hour. I'm using a Harvey woodworking lathe called Turbo T40, and I really love this lathe. It's quiet, it's smooth, stable, robust, and all the adjustment levers and the knobs feel premium. If you're in the market for a lathe, I would highly recommend it. Okay, so I actually shot like 6 different angles of me doing the same thing, and I'll try my best to explain step by step what I'm doing here, and hopefully I can give you a quick 2-minute lesson on wood turning on the lathe. First, make sure the block is mounted to the chuck as securely as possible. I'm using a wood worm screw, which is this little screw that's sticking out of the chuck. And then I could squeeze the block to the chuck using a tailstock. These are some weird words, but it's pretty much the other end of the lathe. Once the block is secure, you're ready to turn. First thing you need to do is make this block into a round cylinder. The final diameter that I'm aiming for is about 1.5 inches. I personally really enjoy using these carbide tip turning tools because you don't have to sharpen these blades. It stays sharp for a long period of time, and you could always just rotate the tip to use a fresh blade. These are replaceable and really beginner friendly. And I'm sure I've seen like kids under 12 use these safely, so that's how much I recommend using these. And all I'm doing here is pushing the tool into the block and slowly start moving across. And having the brass ring really helps to gauge how deep I need to go, because these are about 1.5 inches. And once it's round, I can start making few guidelines. One for the end of the head and one for the middle of the head. There's all different types of ways to make a sphere on the lathe, but I'm just roughballing it here and just removing materials to get it as close to a circle as possible. And after doing about 40 of these, I pretty much got the hang of it and got it pretty close every single time. Once the ball is shaped, I can move on to the collar. To do this, I switched out my tool, which has this diamond head on it. This helps me get into small spaces and allows me to create this collar. And then I switch the tool back to the square tip and start tapering from the bottom of the collar to the brass. And once I have it roughly tapered, I can remove the tailstock and finish shaping the ball. I made few mistakes on this end because it's fairly unstable, so you really need to be more conservative on these cuts. Now, even if you didn't get the best shape or tear outs, this is the part where you can make it look really good, especially with skateboards. With skateboards, there's always going to be tear outs, so what I try to do is leave about a 1/16 inch room for me to sand it down so that I can make it nice and smooth. I'm using a 60 grit sandpaper from my drum sander, which is nice and stiff to keep everything nice and straight. And I'm using this to get the shape that I want, and then I can move on to sanding from 80 to 120 to 180 to 220, 320, 400, 600, and call it done. Now, after sanding up to 600, there's a trick that wood turners use, which is grabbing a handful of shavings and rubbing them against the block. The friction causes the shavings to heat up and release its natural oil and really buff out the wood, and you can clearly see the difference here. Now, as for the finish, I wanted to make it easier on myself and use a simple oil finish. I'm using Warris Oil Wax Finish, and most of these oil finishes are usually some mix of oil and wax. And for smaller projects like this, where it won't be touched by hand frequently, I think it's more than good enough. And the beauty of oil finishes is that once it's starting to get dry, you can just put on more oil finish to make it new again. So I apply some at low speed and buff it out using the high speed to get a nice little sheen to it. And then I can remove it from the woodworm screw and I'm pretty much done. This is the power of having a lathe, which can turn a small block of wood into a finished product in less than 30 minutes. To finish it off, I'm adding a threaded inserts to the bottom of this coat hanger. And then I could thread in the hanger screws, and this is the final product. Okay, so here it is. A coat hanger made out of the worst parts of the skateboards. I really like all the different layers of the skateboards that are showing and the touch of brass to make it look really premium. I'm also happy with the shape that I came up with, and not only would it be functional, but it's really nice to look at. I have some with the brass rings and I have some without, and I even have some with the truck hole showing, so if you're interested, make sure to check out my website, which is woby.design. Now, to install it on your wall, if it's drywall, you need to drill a hole to fit the drywall anchor, and then secure the coat hanger into the drywall anchor. If it's wood, drill a slightly smaller hole than the hanger bolt and screw in the coat hanger. And that's it for this video. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. And as much as it's annoying to hear, it's really annoying to say it too. So just do it. And maybe like this video too while you're at it. Let's finish it off strong and comment down below anything you want, really. Let's see what kind of engagements we get. Thanks again, and until next time. Bye. Okay, so just as a bonus, since this video is pretty short, I want to show you the whole entire process of me turning this block. And this is twice the speed of the video, and I hope you guys enjoy it.